Hey Bulldogs, Chris Bryant here, the Computer Certification Bulldog, and in today's CCNP ROUTE 5-minute video boot camp, I ordered aggregation, not aggravation. And you probably already know what that title refers to as far as the CCNP ROUTE exam goes. If not, you certainly will in a moment. And in the good old simple days when you were working on your CCNA and you were first introduced to route summarization, I showed you how to do that with RIP version 2 and with the EIGRP, and then you learned about it with OSPF. But one thing you quickly learned about it was that while the binary operation was the same, and you're certainly familiar with that by now, the application was different with every protocol. Because with RIP version 2 and EIGRP, we would put it on the interface. With OSPF, we could use the area range command sometimes. We could use the summary address command sometimes. And with BGP, it's a little different still. Now, again, the exact operation of coming up with the summary route, that's going to be exactly the same, and there's a chance for you to practice that here. So if you want to grab something to write with, that's great. We're not actually going to do it bit by bit on the board because I want to concentrate on why BGP is so different with this route aggregation. For one thing, it's different because we actually call it aggregation instead of summarization. Just a little terminology change, but you're going to be doing the exact same thing, but there's a classic gotcha here that I want you to be aware of as well. So let's go ahead and bring up the live equipment, and I'll start the clock here in just a moment. Let me go ahead and clear that out. And let's see what kind of clock we got today. Okay, no pressure at all. I just have to show you this in 5 minutes or we're all going to blow up. So let's go ahead and start and go. So what I've got here set up for us is a very simple summarization exercise, we hope. But right now we've got routers 1 and 3 with the BGP adjacency. And I'll just run show IP BGP here. Let me try summary. And you can see here's our neighbor at 123.3. Everything's fine there. It's been up for 42 minutes, 56 seconds. And the key here right now, router 1, and let me clear that, it's a little easier to look at. Here's router 1, and we've got 4 networks that we've put into BGP with the network command before I started the taping. And everything's as we'd expect there. There's the wait for a locally originated route. Now let's go down to router 3 and see what's going on there. The exact same thing. So we've got these 4 routes, nothing wrong with that, but as always we like to keep our networks or our tables complete yet concise so we can perform some route aggregation here. Now let me ask you this. What summary would cover those 4 networks assuming an 8-bit mask? Because I'll show you that's actually what I've got here. Just created some loopbacks for our exercise. 16, 17, 18, 19. Let's go ahead and tackle that. Router BGP 100. A lot of BGP commands, right? But the one we need here is the one right at the top or near the top, aggregate address. That's what we're going to use to aggregate these addresses. Makes sense to me, right? So let's do aggregate address. And we're going to follow that with the summary route itself, with the aggregate. And in this case, that's going to be 16,000. It's the mask that really makes the difference. And note that these are required entries, obviously. We don't see a CR here or anything. Our mask for this is going to be 252,000. So I use iOS help again. Everything looks fine. We've got some options here with some maps, that kind of thing. But we can go ahead and create it. So let's hit enter. And first, let's take a look at the BGP table on router 1. We have an extra entry now. Everything's the same with those 4 routes that we're actually aggregating. And notice now we have a 16,000/6 entry. All of them marked valid and best, so everything's fine there. So what do we expect to see down on router 3? Surprisingly, perhaps, we see the exact same thing. Now this is a lot different than anything you saw with RIP version 2, with EIGRP, and with OSPF, because what happens there is when you summarize a route, you're going to start advertising the summary, but you're not going to advertise the more specific routes. But BGP is totally different. By default, and let's look at that command I used again, by default, with the aggregate address command, you're going to be advertising the summary, and you're going to be advertising the more specific routes. Now, you may not want to do that. So let's go back up to router 1. We're going to do a little housekeeping here first. Get rid of that previous command. We're going to clear that aggregate address out. And now let's go through the command options again. I'll move the mouse there. Aggregate address, we know that's right. There's the mask. Let's look at those options again, because we've got one here, summary only. Filter more specific routes from updates. Now, in even more advanced studies beyond your CCNP route studies, you might just want to filter some of the routes out, but not all of them, and that's where the suppress map comes in. But we're not using that here. What we are using is the summary only option. And we could still put some maps after that if we wanted to, but let's just go with that. And now let's look at the local table first. See how we're doing on time. Oh, going to be close. So we've got those 4 routes still there, but they're being suppressed. They're not being advertised. Notice that S there. And we go down to router 3, hopefully in just a few seconds. And you'll notice that now it's only getting that summary. It's not getting the more specific routes. So let's go ahead and pause that. Fuse is getting pretty close there. So that's the real key there. There's nothing wrong with using the aggregate address command without the summary only option, but you really want to watch that because we're so used to not seeing more specific routes being advertised with our OSPF, EIGRP, and RIP version 2 protocols. Then when we get to BGP, we've got to remember that by default, the more specific routes are going to be advertised unless we suppress them either with the summary only command, which suppresses all of them, or a suppress map, which will just suppress the ones that we specify. That's it for today's 5-minute boot camp for the CCNP route exam. Thanks for watching. I'm Chris Bryant, the Computer Certification Bulldog.